That's awesome. We should start every meeting like that. Welcome to the Price Writer podcast with Jeremy Keating and me, Katrin Townsend. Join us as we explore and discuss the world of insurance-related books, offering our insights, recommendations, and crucially, how to apply it to insurance pricing roles. Last time, we tentatively recommended why insurance markets fail and what to do about it. But this time, Jeremy is sharing not just one, not two, but 3 books. Hi, Jeremy.
Hello, Katrin.
So why 3 books this time?
Okay, so it's 3 books because when I was in New York to collect the Independent Press Award for Price Writer, I met multiple authors, quite a few, in fact, lots and lots of different authors who have also won awards for their books. And it just set me thinking that it was a great sort of opportunity to review some other award-winning books for the podcast. So I'm going to talk about Hiring Veterans by Matthew Louie. Matthew was at my table at the awards evening, and it was talking to him that put the idea for this podcast in my head. The Connection Playbook, which is by Andy Schaff, and Passion Struck by John R. Miles. They are the ones that I felt most drawn to because I just felt they'd possibly be the most relevant for pricing.
We'll start with the first one, Hiring Veterans, written by your table neighbour.
Yes, indeed. This is a very good book. It is beautifully typeset. I've got it here and I'll put it there so you can definitely see it. The typesetting is gorgeous. It's really full of charts, tables, procedures, checklists, diagrams. And Matthew just knows everything about this subject. I think he's one of those times where someone's written a book and they have really decided what not to put in, because I think he could have done it twice as long, maybe even more. His role, he advises companies on creating programs to hire veterans, and I'm sure he's very good at it. But I couldn't think of a single ex-forces person working in insurance pricing in the UK. I'm not saying there aren't any, but I just couldn't think of it. And I really got to thinking about why that might be. So Matthew describes the sort of people that are veterans and what their sort of careers and lives are like. And he said they have a manual for everything. And it's all about how people follow those procedures, but also people need to think for themselves and know when they don't need to follow the procedures. He lists values and they include being entrepreneurial, being trustable, so diligent, accuracy is important, be able to transfer skills, both themselves when they work on other projects or to other people that stay very cool under pressure, and they're often committed and quite loyal. And really, I felt that those are skills that we should be using. Some of them are skills that I think we have already. Some of the things I think we could lean on even more. There's also a really good section on hiring female veterans and disabled veterans as well. And Matthew talks quite a lot about how life in and after the military has actually been quite ahead in DEI recruitment for a long time. I feel it's a really good book and it's very much a how-to manual, but it also takes time to convince you why you should hire veterans and why they are good people for your team. The downside is that it is 100% unashamedly USA focused. So it's not really that useful for a UK based pricing person. But I know we do have a few people that follow Price Writer in the USA. So if you are thinking about hiring veterans, I would recommend it for you. I do think it's worth a read.
Yeah, I've noticed that pricing in the UK isn't that open to career changes. I've been in previous teams when the average age is 24. Including me as an over 30-year-old. So we do tend to veer definitely towards the younger end of the spectrum. Why do you think that is? And what previous careers do you think would make a really great base for pricing? What do you think?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I am one of the oldest, thankfully not the oldest person working in pricing, but I'm definitely in that demographic of being the most experienced. I kind of think it's a hangover from it being regarded as an actuarial field. So actuaries hardly move function, which is really bizarre because you spend 7 years learning a hugely wide amount of syllabus about life assurance and pensions. And pretty much as soon as you go into a sort of section of actuarial, people tend to stay there. Some people move, but it's actually not very easy to move. So I think it's a hangover from that. But interestingly, I think there's quite a lot of people that we ought to be able to entice into pricing roles. They are good careers who are experienced in other areas. So I think people that have probably been pilots would be very useful. So they are very smart people. They're very good at working through checklists. They're extremely calm under pressure. I've got a couple of friends who are in medicine, and actually, I think they could be people with quite useful skills. Certainly, quite interesting knowledge for some areas that I feel we don't necessarily have in our teams, and engineering as well. In fact, especially defense engineering and software from those areas. I really think people with those backgrounds could be very useful to us for improving what we do.
Yeah, I would like to see more people with product knowledge coming into the pricing space. So whether that is through their vocational training as mechanics or things like builders, you can imagine how useful that would be in property and even some kind of engineering insurance, that type of thing. I think that would just bring a whole nother dimension to the very statistical model.
Mhm.
Yes, and I see more places having insured object teams now, and I think that would be a really great place for those people.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I can remember conversations where we were asking each other things like, why is the burning cost, why is the severity high for this segment or something like that? And we can theorize, but actually having people that have done construction work or are mechanics and backgrounds like that is very useful. And there's so much they can do that's analytically useful as well in those areas.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, let's move on to the Connection Playbook by Andy Schaff. Tell us what that book's about and what your main takeaways are.
Yeah, so this one is about how to form connections with people that you have some form of relationship with. So it could be a partner, a colleague, a friend, or something else. I think it's most useful when the relationship is difficult for some reason. And there are useful exercises to overcome those issues and deepen the relationship. Some of it is dealing with your kind of own mindset. So there's ways of visualizing your thoughts as objects that you can actually move them around and choose whether to focus on them or not at any particular time. There's ways also to split your thoughts from the emotions that you feel with them as well. So being able to sort of dispassionately talk and work about things without feeling the kind of emotional parts that come with it. The key foundation for all the relationships is trust, and there's ways to create and deepen trust as well. It reminded me, that particular parts really reminded me of the five dysfunctions of a team, which we were talking about a few weeks ago. So there's frameworks for discussing expectations, and he talks about expectations for quite a long time. That this scenario where I probably agree with him actually. Try not to carry around unexplored expectations of other people because it's a recipe for disappointment. It can be in teams, personal relationships. But if you expect things of people, but you never actually communicate them to people, it's a recipe for disappointment. And there's some good frameworks for exploring expectations with other people. It often comes down, though, to communication and patience being key. So if you imagine you're working on a project and in your head you're expecting delivery of X, Y, Z, and then you don't receive delivery of that, you've got to say to yourself, well, actually, I never told people what I expected. So in that way, I think this is quite strong, firm foundations. I think this is pretty useful. But there are quite a few areas where I don't feel I share values with the author. For example, I rather disagree on the advice that he gives when it comes to having difficult conversations. He says that often difficult conversations are made difficult simply because we think that they're going to be difficult. we kind of work ourselves into a place where the conversation is in our minds difficult. So when we have it, it's difficult. And he suggests that we should rather take them in our stride. And I don't really agree with that. I mean, I think, in fact, difficult conversations are made easier through preparing for them. If you're like, oh, that one's going to be difficult, I need to think about that. I need to prepare for it. Maybe I need to talk to other people first. I think that's the way that you deal with them and make them less difficult. But hey, if you're going to have a conversation and you don't know how the other person's going to react, you don't know where it's going to go, that's going to be a difficult conversation. I don't think any form of sort of mindset. Yeah, actually, in defense, I think you could have some mindsets around that, but that's not going to not make it a difficult conversation. Yeah, so I kind of disagree on that. And so on the whole, I think this book is okay. There's useful tips in there. I don't really agree with all things. And I'll be honest, I don't really think it's that useful for pricing. So I'm not going to recommend that one.
Yeah, I think some of the things about expectation setting, I think that is really relevant for pricing, particularly because so many of our teams churn quite quickly. So the last time you did a deployment, you were working with, A, B, and C people, and now that team has totally changed. So you actually only have A and then D and E, for example. If you don't make your expectations really explicit, then that team might not know that you want that from them, and that can cause a real frustration. I've had that, I've felt that in the past, and so I do think that there is a really good point around expectation setting, but maybe you don't need to spend 8 hours listening to an audiobook to understand that.
Yeah, I tend to agree. It is right that you do need to communicate these things. You can't expect things from people that you haven't talked about. And if you don't communicate them and then you're disappointed, that's kind of your fault. So, yeah, so I do agree with him there.
Okay, well, let's move on to the last book, which is called Passion Struck by John R. Miles. This sounds very intriguing. Tell me about it.
It's certainly a good title, actually. So, John R. Miles, it's also a podcast that he does, which is business motivational, and he's had some great guests on it, actually. It took me a while to warm to this book. So, it is an exploration of 12 principles to help with success, but each of the principles has itself multiple subheadings of similarly principles based. So, it's kind of listy and it's kind of an amalgamation of many self-help principles and techniques, and it helps you be better engaged at work and business. I found it too listy for me. I like books that are deep, have quite a lot of anecdotes, things that you can demonstrate the points in this way. And he does have a few anecdotes, but they're quite light, really. He does have a few examples and quotes, but again, it's quite light. Most of the content is very much listy. However, I did really warm to it. Once I got into it and comfortable with the structure, I actually found it quite good to have such a huge range of self-help techniques in one place. And it's full of actions. So there's a lot to take away from it. And there's additional stuff on the website and there's a PDF you can get as well. So it kind of leads you into even more that you can do to actually develop. I think it's kind of a combined and big reminder of lots of good things you could do. There is good material. I will list a few because that's the structure of the book. So that's the best way to do it. So, for examples, we're told to decide what we want. That's pretty good advice, actually, because you can't get what you want if you don't decide what you want. You need to execute a plan. So, there's steps before this, such as making a plan. You need to be decisive when faced with uncertainty. I quite like this. There are a couple of good examples given with this. They are, as I said, quite light, but they are pretty good. Different people, how you have to act sometimes, even if you don't know what the outcomes are going to be. You shape your destiny, not probability. I really love that, actually, because I think as statisticians, we can get bogged down in the idea that like everything's probabilistic and things might work out like this. And I think we do these games where we're like, oh, I think there's a 75% chance of X, Y, Z, but that's not really how the world works. And there's say yes to what you want, even if you're scared. So again, it's quite like we use an example of someone who just said yes to anything she wanted to for an entire year, and it really improved her life. So it's a story I've heard before, actually, and it's an interesting one in itself. So, and there's lots and lots of good pieces of advice. So, and they are pretty practical. They generally come with practical ways of doing them. There's sort of snippets of motivation as well in there. So I'll give some examples. Abraham Lincoln didn't become a lawyer until he was 33, which I didn't know actually, which is funny because I know bits and pieces about Abraham Lincoln, but he's not one I've read a biography of. But yeah, he didn't really decide what he wanted to do with his life until he was quite grown up. And in fact, he didn't end up even staying in that because obviously he became president. But once he discovered his passion with anti-slavery, then he really threw himself into that. So it just took him time to work out what he wanted to do. Keep the main thing is pretty good advice as well. And make sure you communicate to people the main thing. So if you're the leader in a team, I talk about this with strategy, just make it simple, make sure people can understand it, keep broadcasting what the main thing actually is. You've got to do things or you are going to regret that you didn't do them. So it's the typical Mark Twain advice, but it's pretty good in itself. Journey of 1,000 miles, it starts with a single step. So you really have to take those first steps.
One of my favorite, like, I don't know if it counts as a motivational quote, is that a 6-minute mile is the same distance as a 12-minute mile.
Okay, that's quite good.
And I really like that because I'm an intermittent runner. Periodically, I go through a phase where I do a lot of running and I stop. And it's always really hard to get back into it.
Yeah.
And it's quite difficult, particularly, as someone who wants to be good at things. I think most people in pricing maybe feel like that. To say, oh, I'm not very good at it, but I'm doing it and I'm still doing the same distance, whether I do it at 6 miles or 12 miles an hour. So I think that for me has always been very motivational to get out there, get started, kind of maybe ties some of these ideas together a little bit. Although I think I got it from a Pinterest picture rather than a self-help book.
Yeah, I think that's true, actually. So I've been on and off learning French for 10 years. I can read and write French really well, but I still struggle to speak it, especially at a natural speed. And it's not something I am talented at. I'm really not talented. I can play guitar badly as well. But there came a point where I was like, I could learn guitar all day long for weeks and weeks, months and years and be at it. So I just stopped being interested in it. How feel, I don't know, because it's just, you're right about we tend to want to be really good at things. But it's funny with running, I really didn't enjoy running as a boy or at school or anything like that. And it's only now as a grown up that I enjoy it, knowing full well I'm not very good at it, but I really enjoy it. I'm not going to be the winner of races and stuff like that. However, the funny thing is that being a runner now at like 44 years of age, I suspect there probably aren't many people at school from my school who are now the same age that can run as fast as I can. So, just sometimes you got to be patient. Right. So set goals for days, months, years, and say to yourself, what would I regret not doing? Achieve those things, or at least try. And finally, you also said, Carrie, this is one I didn't know. The Stephen King book, Carrie, was rejected by publishers 33 times, but he kept sending it off. Though in fairness, he was actually really very poor at the time. So he didn't really have that much of an option. And I think that's an interesting one as well, how sometimes people achieve stuff because they don't have any other options. And if we had the tenacity of people that really have to succeed at things all of the time, we would probably achieve more. I ended up really liking this one. I'd recommend it to anyone in pricing who is ambitious as a person. So if you're serious about taking actions, because it's a very actiony, listy kind of book, to improve yourself and you're willing to accept you don't know where that might go, then this is a good book for you. But it is something you really need to know. It's something you're going to have to work at. So I'm thinking I'm going to get myself the paper copy actually in order to work through it.
Wow, that is a big endorsement, reading it twice, I guess. I mean, I always find books like this a bit overwhelming because there's just so much that you could take from it. I don't want to put you on the spot here. Well, maybe I do. What have you specifically done or changed as a result of this book?
Yeah, a lot of the books remind us in a lot of ways because I've read a lot of books that have very similar material in them. There is two things I've probably done recently though. It reminded me that it's okay to hire people who are good at things that I'm not good at. I mean, that's really the point of hiring other people because I can't be good at everything, and there are things that I can develop, but it's going to take time. And even if I did, I'm too busy with lots of other things. So just remembering it's okay to hire other people. And I also, there's some techniques around visualizing thoughts. And this is something I've done before, but it did remind me that it can be really useful. For example, if I'm thinking, oh, it's really hard, Price Writer is really difficult, I'm just having a really difficult time of it at the moment. Actually, just delving deeper into that and thinking about why you're in the situation you are. And you can turn that around to phrases like, I get to do Price Writer, which is a genuine phrase I think to myself at times. Like, I have worked along this path to arrive and I get to do Price Writer. I'm really fortunate to get to do that. So it will be hard sometimes. Life is hard. Nothing worth achieving is easy. Something I tell my daughter quite often. She gets upset when she can't answer questions because she doesn't just know the answer. But I'm like, you can't just know the answer. That's the point of learning. So yes, that's it really. Those are two things that I've done recently that are recommended in the book.
Amazing, and well done for reading so many books in such a short amount of time. So now next time it's my turn to share 3 books, and I'll be doing a roundup of 3 books that are perfect for encouraging and supporting young people who are post exams, preparing to take the next step in their education, maybe looking for something useful to do over the summer. And they're all books that I read between the ages of about 16 and 20. One of them I still use daily. So I'm excited to share that with you. Thank you for being with us today, and we hope you'll join us next time.
Price Writers is a training and education company focused on insurance pricing. Find out more about our engaging training, graduate schemes, and workshops by visiting pricewriters.com.